One of the things that I will do is on the YouTube video, I'll post a link to the chat box. So that way you can look at student responses. It's also my way of checking attendance. So if you can right now, just type here for attendance. All right. Very good. Very good. Make sure you type here. Thank you very much, everybody. So the first thing we're going to look at is this quick video. And remember this video I told you guys that we want to look at the causes of American imperialism, right? The causes. So what I want you to do is we're going to look at the reasons for why Hawaii would annex, explain how Hawaii was annexed in the United States. So in other words, how we added Hawaii as a state, right? What I want you to do is take notes on the causes and effects of us adding Hawaii to the United States. A couple things that you want to know is know the McKinley Tariff, know who Queen Liliuokalani is, and also the effects, right? So let's go through this video. This is something that you could mention in your essay.
This is the Hawaii most visitors never see. An hour from the luxury hotels and shops in the farthest corner away from Honolulu. It's the Hawaiians' Hawaii, working class and proudly native, where locals will tell you Hawaii is occupied by the US, that it has been for 124 years, and that it'll one day be free. We came here to see the native sovereignty movement in action. We are driving through Waimanalo, which is a stronghold of the sovereignty movement here in Hawaii. And we're headed to a village in the hills that was established by a sovereignty group called the Nation of Hawaii. The village is called Refuge of Waimanalo, with a population of roughly 80. The state handed the group 45 acres of land in the 90s after it occupied a popular beach for over a year. Bumpy Kanahele is the group's leader and head of the village. Do you have your own passport here in the Nation of Hawaii?
We have things ready to print out for the passports.
Can I apply for one? They are banning Muslims in the U.S.
We're taking in citizenship applications now, so any of you disgruntled Americans want to come to Hawaii, come visit us in Oahu, and we'll be more than happy to accommodate. You gotta learn about us, our history.
And for Native Hawaiians, it's a painful history. In 1893, armed U.S. naval forces helped American sugar plantation owners overthrow Hawaii's queen. The provisional government that was set up after ceded Hawaii's sovereignty to the U.S. Then it embarked on a campaign to squash Native culture. What's one word you would use to describe what happened here in 1893?
Genocide. That was their intent, to make life hard for us in such a way it would cause our own destruction. And that's what happened. It's still happening. It's more passive. It's like genocide in paradise.
It's made official at the White House. President Eisenhower congratulates the new congressional representatives of Hawaii, adding the 50th and southernmost state.
Hawaii officially became America's 50th state in 1959. In 1993, the U.S. formally apologized for its involvement in the illegal overthrow of the sovereign Hawaiian kingdom, 100 years after the fact. That's where the story of how Bumpy wrangled these lush foothills begins. In that apology resolution, the U.S. admitted that Native Hawaiians had never relinquished their sovereignty. Armed with that fact, Bumpy and 300 others occupied Makapu'u Beach. They set up tents and blocked the area for 15 months. Hawaii's governor asked Bumpy to end the occupation in exchange for a 55-year lease on this land. Part of the agreement was that if and when a sovereign Hawaiian nation is established, this land would become part of it. Along with the renewed fight for independence came a cultural shift throughout Hawaii. Native Hawaiians began reclaiming traditions that were once actively suppressed. That meant teaching youth language and dance, getting traditional tattoos using ancient techniques, and fostering traditional farming and food making. But in reality, not much has changed. Everyone we talked to during our week there repeatedly stressed that Hawaii continues to be occupied illegally.
Military complex gave us our complex. Yes, post-traumatic syndrome. 124 years have gone, but we are still here, standing strong.
At a gathering of musicians and activists in Honolulu, the inherited pain was palpable.
We all come from very deep hurt. A crime has been committed, still being committed.
That is part of our struggle to maintain rights, but more importantly, what are those rights rooted in? And those rights are rooted in a country that had its sovereignty and recognition stolen by the United States.
Sugar barons, they wanted to soak up the land.
Bumpy sees his village as a model for self-determination, but for now, it's still partially on the grid. The village runs off 200 amp boxes with houses sharing power.
Nobody can like have a hot stove going, you know, like one of those hot plates,
Yeah.
or like a blow dryer. They gotta watch all of that. It's
Oh,
like
wow.
everybody's in the same house.
Because you guys are off the grid.
Yeah,
So what does it mean for running water?
we're currently working on getting water from the mountains.
Brandon is Bumpy's nephew and one of the village leaders.
We're not politicians. We're not lawyers. We're not like, you know, these highly schooled individuals. We're just Hawaiians exercising our rights over here.
20-year-old Piripo was born and raised here.
Yeah, going to school, I had to leave here. Had to go to school, had to get an education because that's the required law. I could have been homeschooled, but I'd rather go out, make friends.
When people ask you, where do you live, what do you say?
People ask me where I live, I tell them I live in Pu'unua, Wamanalo, or we just call it Sovereignty.
You call this place sovereignty?
Yeah.
For some Native Hawaiians on the outside, sovereignty movements like Bumpy's are beyond symbolic. They have a real impact.
Overall, you need those type of people. If we don't shake up things, Hawaiian language would have never been approved to be taught as a foreign language. We wouldn't have Native Hawaiian agencies to provide us with better health and wellness, nutrition, education. So we fought for a lot to receive a lot.
What's your message to Americans in the United States who might not know much about Hawaii's history or what you're doing here?
I don't know if I want to talk to the people of America. They're like battling with each other right now, right? And so all I can say is we've been there. You know, we've been there, America, and we still have a lot to settle with the United States. It's not done.
Hey guys, it's Dina. Be sure to check out the last video in this series where I take you back to the
So what I
studio.
want you guys to do, just take a minute. I want you to just write your answers in the chat box. So just what I'm looking to do is explain how Hawaii was added to the United States. If you want to identify what the McKinley Tariff was, I'm totally fine if you want to Google it. And also who Queen Liliuokalani was, in your response, go for it. I think that these responses are helpful because you could implement them in your essay. And also the good thing is, when I upload a video on YouTube, you'll see this whole chat box there. So I'll give you guys about a minute and a half. I'm going to play some Hawaiian music, and then I'll call on some people to share their response. So go for it. Because I think this is what also Alika and what as well as Isabel said, and a lot of you guys said. So what the tariff is doing, it's taxing sugar coming from Hawaii, taxing sugar from Hawaii. So even if you are an American that's gone out to Hawaii, and let's say you started a sugar plantation, you are being taxed, all right? So what they end up doing is with the help of the military, rather than having to worry about this tax, one of the things that they said was, why not just take over Hawaii for ourselves, right? So they went ahead and did that. Mildred, can I have you elaborate on your response? Thank you for sharing, Mildred. So and just kind of to reiterate what you and Sam have said is, sugar planters want to take over the government because they didn't want to pay the tariff. The government, or our American military, helped them. So they were able to overthrow Queen Liliuokalani, right? And with that in mind, that's led to a lot of issues that still go on today. I mean, in 1990, President Clinton, 1993, President Clinton actually apologized for those actions back then. When we overthrew Queen Liliuokalani, when you're looking at Hawaiian culture, those things were trying to be abolished during the time. They were trying to Americanize everyone in Hawaii, just like that they did, same thing that they did, remember, with the Carlisle School for Native Americans, right? So, and this is all around that same time frame of the 1890s and early 1900s. So in short, one of the things that you want to mention in your essay, the cause of American imperialism, this is economic, right? This is purely economic. We wanted to control the sugar trade. So we overthrew Queen Liliuokalani. That's the effect. As a result of that, you're getting a loss of Hawaiian culture, but also you're getting just some of the economic benefits that are leaning solely on the United States and not on the Hawaiian people. Any questions at all about that? If that makes sense and you know how to use this for your essay, type yes for me. Only Elika? Anyone else? Okay, if you're unsure, just type unsure, and then I'll make sure to come back to that later. Okay. If you're still unsure, remember I have office hours that are 24/7. So I check my email repeatedly. Sometimes I try to cut it off at 7 just so I get some sanity. But email me if you're unsure, and I'll make sure to get back to you. Just make sure that that if I don't get back to you, that you keep emailing me. If you email me 4 a.m. in the morning, I mean, which some kids have, I'll probably get back to you by 7 because I'm usually at my computer by 7-ish. So next thing I want to go through is let's look at the Spanish-American War. Because through this war, we see a lot of imperialism. We see imperialism of Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the Philippines. So I'm going to show you a video, just label the Spanish-American War, and take some notes. And then we're going to go through some documents that you can use as evidence. Okay. Hello, Malika. Welcome. We are looking at, I put in some documents for you to look at, Malika, just to open them up on Schoology and take notes on this video.
The island of Cuba lies only 90 miles from the United States. A colony of Spain since 1492, Cuba exported sugar, fruit, and tobacco to the United States and the rest of the world. American investors by 1880 had spent millions of dollars in Cuba. In Cuba itself, movement for independence from Spain had a very long history. By 1880, Cuban insurrection had become a crisis for the Spanish government. On January 28, 1898, the USS Maine entered Havana Harbor of Cuba. The Maine was one of 4 state-of-the-art battleships in the growing U.S. fleet. The ship was a great source of pride and a symbol of America's increasing world influence. President William McKinley ordered the Maine into Havana. Just why he sent it is unclear. Some argue McKinley saw the order as part of normal diplomatic exchange with Spain. Others argue McKinley wanted to encourage the Cuban rebels and demoralize the Spanish. McKinley may also have wanted to protect American property from both the Spanish and rebels. On February 15th, the Maine exploded at a devastating blast that ripped the ship's hull apart. The Maine quickly sank. 266 Americans died in the explosion and fire or drowned. Across the country, Americans asked, in public and private, who sank the Maine? 3 months later, the United States declared war on Spain and began massing troops for an invasion of Cuba. The invasion began in late June 1898. Your task is to figure out why.
Okay, so what I'd like you guys to do first, after viewing that video, and this is going to be very valuable for you to go back in that chat box, because you could use this in your contextualization of your essay. You could also use this as, of course, a cause of imperialism. What I want you to do, I'm going to repeat myself 3 times because I should have wrote the question here, is from the video, tell me the relationship between Cuba, United States, and Spain. So I'll repeat that. From the video, tell me the relationship between Cuba, United States, and Spain. One more time. From the video, tell me the relationship between Cuba, United States, and Spain. So just get in the chat. Don't be afraid to be wrong. And I'm going to play for you guys some Cuban music for about 2 minutes. But get your answer in the chat box.
Siempre que se hace una historia, se habla de un viejo, de un niño o de sí. Pero mi historia es difícil. Voy a hablarles de un hombre común. Haré la historia de un ser de otro mundo, de un animal de galaxia. Es una historia que tiene que ver con el curso de la Vía Láctea. Es una historia enterrada, es sobre un ser de la nada. Nació de una tormenta, en el sol de una noche el penúltimo mes. Fue de planeta en planeta, buscando agua potable. Quizás buscando la vida, buscando la muerte, eso nunca se sabe. Quizás buscando siluetas o algo semejante que fuera adorable, o por lo menos querible, besable, amable. Él descubrió que las minas del rey Salomón se hallaban en el cielo y no en el África ardiente, como pensaba la gente.
First
Pero
question
las
I want you to
piedras
answer,
son
so I'm seeing a
frías
lot of
y le
responses, is
interesaban calor y alegría.
who at this time
Las joyas no tenían alma,
controlled Cuba? Which country controlled Cuba during the late 1800s? Which country controlled Cuba? Write in the chat box.
quise decir a la tierra. Supo la historia de un golpe, sintió en su cabeza.
All right, very good. So I'd say one of this, all these are very strong responses. Can I get, let's go with Alika. Can you elaborate on yours?
So like based on the notes that I took beforehand, I remembered that how like in the beginning they were saying how the like because of the weakening power of Spain, it kind of led to the opportunity for the US to start conquering Spain. But then Cuba was just kind of in the middle where like it was right in the middle of the fight between Spanish and the Americans. That's why Cuba was kind of the leading tensions between both countries.
Yes, very good. So one thing that you want to make sure I'm gonna just that you want to understand is during the 1890s, Cuba was conquered. It was colonized by Spain. Spain had control over Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the Philippines. Those are the big three that you need to know. Spain had colonized them way back in the 1500s, and they still had control over these territories, but they were losing that power. They were losing that power. You guys ever hear of the term mestizo? What does mestizo mean? We learned about it in world history, but also we talked about at the beginning of the year. Type it. What do I mean by that? Those terms: mestizo, peninsulares, Creoles, mulatto. Yeah, people of mixed race. It was the casta system, the social class system that was set up by Spain. Where remember, if you were on the top of that social class, you were someone that was of European blood. If you were in the middle, you were someone that was mixed, Spanish and native blood. And then if you were at the very bottom, you were either a slave or you were someone that was native. And the same thing happened in Cuba and the Philippines because the Spanish conquered. But the Cubans now are fighting for their independence. The Cubans now are fighting for their independence. And what we end up doing is we see this as an opportunity to help the Cubans, right? So I'll repeat that. Is one of the causes of you could see of us acquiring more territory is Spain is losing their power in Cuba, Philippines, and we see this as an opportunity to free those people from Spanish rule. Does that make sense? So what we need to do is I want you to open up these documents. I'm going to tell you which documents you could use in your essay, right? Is we need to figure out what was really the reason for us going to war with Spain. We win, we defeat Spain, right? But I want you to look through these documents and let's go through the reasons for why we went to war with Spain. Okay? And you could mention this in your essay. So the first document, let's look at this one. This is from the New York Journal. So I want you to scroll the New York Journal. I'm going to read it to you. And then I want you to kind of just take notes. You can either put it on your Google Doc, make a copy of it, or if you want to type in the chat box on why would we go to war with Spain and engage in imperialism, right? So follow along with me as I read through this. This is from the New York Journal. George Bryson, the Journal's special reporter at Havana, writes that it is the secret opinion of many people in Havana, which is in Cuba, that the warship Maine was destroyed by a mine and 258 men were killed on purpose by the Spanish. This is the opinion of several American naval authorities. The Spaniards, it is believed, arranged to have the Maine drop anchor over a harbor mine. Wires connected the mine to the magazine of the ship. If this is true, the brutal nature of the Spaniards will be shown by the fact that they waited to explode the mine until all the men had gone to sleep. So what we have here is they're saying that the Spaniards had put a mine. Mine is, think about it as a bomb that explodes close to an American ship. Spanish officials are protesting too much that they did not do it. Our government has ordered an investigation. The newspaper has sent divers to Havana to report on the condition of the wreck. Newspapers also offering a $50,000 reward for exclusive evidence that will convict whoever is responsible. So they're saying they're trying to find out whether or not this did happen. And they're putting $50,000. I mean, that's close to, I don't know the exact amount, but I would say that's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars today, if anyone knows more information. Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Theodore Roosevelt, says he's convinced that the destruction of the Maine and Havana Harbor was not an accident. The suspicion that the Maine was purposely blown up grows stronger every hour. Not a single fact to the contrary has been produced. So what I want you to do is write in the box, why would we, according to this source, why would we declare war on Spain? So I'll give you guys about a minute. Go for it. 2 minutes, write it in your response. I'll play some more music as you do that. This is Silvio Rodriguez. They call him the John Lennon of Cuba.
No existe un momento del día en que pueda olvidarme de ti. El mundo parece distinto cuando no estás junto a mí.
Thank you. You guys are great. All right, so I'm hearing a lot of good responses. Let's get Reina. Can you use a microphone, share your response?
That's pretty much it.
Excellent, thank you very much. So we already had a rough relationship with Spain, right? But based on this article, the U.S. declared war because of the assumption that Spain attacked the U.S. on purpose. That the USS Maine, this was a boat and it had exploded. They're blaming the Spanish for this. That is actually, later they found out that it was not the Spanish that did it. The bombing was actually an internal combustion. So this, there was no evidence at all that the Spanish had done this. None at all. But I want you to tell me, is this newspaper biased? Yes or no? Is it biased? So meaning, is it neutral? Is it favoring one view over the other? Is this giving us factual information? Look at the language. Yeah, definitely. Isabel, can you share for us how we know that this is biased? Give me some evidence. Give me some words from this.
So it's biased because it was on the second one. It said Spanish officials are protesting too much that they did not do it. And that's almost like saying how like guilty are always gonna like try to over explain themselves. Like, no, they actually didn't do it. And there's another, they were like, men were killed on purpose by the Spanish, and they said how they did it in their sleep. But it's like what you said, it was an internal combustion. Yeah, it happened in their sleep because they didn't know something was wrong with the ship. The Spanish were just chilling.
So this is what you get called. This is called yellow journalism. So one of the causes for imperialism, or why we would engage in imperialism, is because of the press, right? The media at this point was trying to sway everybody to the opinion that, hey, we should go ahead and defeat the Spanish and then acquire this territory. So this is very biased, right? Questions on that source? So I'm going to move to some other sources, and all these sources, we're not going to go over all of them. But I do want to go over, if you could go to this document of reconcentration camps. Okay. So just follow along with me, and I'll have you type your response. So we'll look at two more documents in this one. So in the late 1800s, the Spanish were losing control of Cuba. Concerned about guerrilla warfare in the countryside, they moved rural Cubans to reconcentration camps, where the Spanish claimed they would be better able to protect them. Any person who failed to obey was shot. Food was scarce. Famine and disease quickly swept through the camps. By 1898, 1/3 of Cuba's population had been forcibly sent into concentration camps. This account of a camp was forwarded to D.C. by Fitzhugh Lee, the U.S. Consul General in Havana, who said its author was a man of integrity and character. Here's what it reads. Sir, we will relate you to what we saw with our own eyes. 460 women and children thrown on the ground, some in dying condition, others sick and dead. The circumstances are the following. Complete accumulation of bodies dead and alive, so that it was impossible to take one step without walking over them. The greatest lack of cleanliness, want of light, air, and water, the food lacking in quality and quantity, what was necessary to sustain life. From all this, we conclude that the number of deaths among the reconcentrados was amounted to 77%. And here is a photo of that. So I want you to go ahead and, using this document, just briefly write in there, the chat box, why might this be a reason for us to go to war with Spain? And going to war would then, of course, lead us to imperialism. So go for it. Give you about a minute and a half. You guys are doing a great job. Keep it up. We'll listen to more Silvio Rodriguez.
Yo quiero escucharla. Si no la escuchas tú, es que te has convertido en parte de mi alma. Ya nada me conforma si no estás tú también. Más allá de tus labios, el sol y las estrellas, contigo en la distancia, amada mía, estoy.
All right. So let's start talking about this. Can you guys see Riley, my dog? You see her? Just type yes or no. All right, so side note here, interesting fact for the day. Riley and Rudd. Rudd is a nice bird. What? How dare you call my dog a bird? But no, this is Riley. Rudd, come over here. Rudd, I want to grab a treat. So anyways, how this is relevant to the curriculum is they are both actually the native dogs of Cuba. So they are called Havanese because they're from Havana, which is in Cuba. So I did know the history of it completely. I believe that they were actually taken from Cuba. They were brought to Europe. Come here, Rudd. And then that's how they got their name. They became lap dogs. I can't remember for who. But yeah, let me show you Rudd. Here's Rudd right now. So he's, there's two of them.
Grabbing him.
So there they are. There's Rudd and Riley, the two dogs from Havana, right? But yeah, so they're all right. So let's go through this, guys. So I'm going to have you guys elaborate. So what does this source tell us about the Spanish-American War? Ashley, can you share for me?
Can you hear?
So yeah, thank you, Ashley, for sharing. And Isabel and Itzel's answers are just like the same as yours, where it's saying the U.S. saw treatment of the people who were aware that they wanted freedom and took this as an opportunity to help aid them, which would eventually lead them to have connection to each other, to the Cubans, right? So, and Itzel says the U.S. saw that if anyone saw Cubans supporting independence, they would be killed or sent to concentration camps. So basically, what the U.S. is trying to do, the reason why we want to go to war with Spain, is to free the Cubans, from these concentration camps that are shown right here. All right. So we feel like we have a moral responsibility. That's the cause of us getting into the Spanish-American War and freeing the Cuban people, right? Interesting fact, though, here is that these concentration camps, right? So a lot of these prisoners were already released from concentration camps by the time we declared war on Spain. So keep that in mind, right? Questions at all about that? And then let's look at one more source. This is a quick one. All right, so what I want you to do is take a look at these two charts. And what I want you to do is explain to me what this tells us about why we would want to go to war with Spain. All right, go for it. Just type it in the chat box.
Es que te has convertido en parte de mi alma. Ya nada me conforma si no estás tú también. Más allá de tus labios, del sol y las estrellas, contigo en la distancia, amada mía, estoy.
Anyone want to take any guesses to what's going on in these two charts right here? Right, so Alcacez, I guess America wanted to free Cuba from Spain because Cuba exports a large amount of goods to the US and without the restriction of Spain, so they're able to develop connection with Cuba, right? Linda says, based on statistics, we can see that American exports to Cuba were increasing by a lot. So what we want to get from here is a trade, resources. By 1893, I mean, we end up having a lot of influence in Cuba, right? And we want to continue this trade for sugar plantations, right? If there's instability going on between Spain and Cuba, we're not getting that, right? So that's one of the reasons why we wanted to stop that instability, is because of economics. We engage in sugar plantations. Questions at all about that? So that's one thing that you want to write about your causes, is purely economic causes. There's a moral cause, which we brought up, right? But there's also the economic cause. And you could bring this up looking at Hawaii as well as Cuba. Questions at all about that? There is one more we could look at. And I want you to look at this one, the Platt Amendment. And you could actually kind of write this down as, you could mention this as a cause and effect, right? So I'm going to read to you this Platt Amendment. And this is one of the amendments that I think shows a lot about American history and our expansionist philosophy during this time. So the Platt Amendment was signed by Congress in 1901 after the end of the Spanish-American War. We win the Spanish-American War. It outlined the role of the U.S. and Cuba and allowed the United States the right to intervene for the preservation of Cuban independence, the maintenance of a government adequate for the protection of life, property, and individual liberty, Cuba would be an independent country, but the U.S. would control or have a say in many of its economic and foreign policy decisions, and would be allowed special business and trade deals as well as naval bases. Many Cubans resented, they disliked the fact that they had fought for independence from Spain, but really had just placed one unwelcome ruler with another, the United States. So I want you to go ahead, just type in what this Platt Amendment does. What is it doing? And what is it? And I guess more importantly, what does this tell us as the reason for why the United States wanted to take over and defeat the Spaniards? So go for it. Summarize for me this Platt Amendment, I guess. That's what I want you to do. Yeah, sorry, my dogs are going crazy. They hate this. They hate the Platt Amendment, right? Because they're Cuban dogs. They're from Havana, and they're like, this Platt Amendment is terrible, because it is. So go ahead.
Siempre que se hace una historia, le habla de un viejo y un niño de sí. Pero mi historia es difícil, no voy a hablarles de un hombre común. Haré la historia de un ser de otro mundo, de un animal de galaxia. Es una historia que tiene que ver con el curso de la Vía Láctea. Es una historia enterrada, es sobre un ser de la nada.
All right, so see a lot of great answers here. Alexis, can you share your response for me, please? Go for it. Yes, excellent. Thank you very much. And yeah, you're right, Jennifer. The Platt Amendment allows the U.S. the right to intervene for preservation of Cuba's independence, right? So we're basically saying, hey, Cuba, you could have your own government. However, we could establish special business and special trade and naval deals. So I would write this in your essay. One of the things that you want to bring up is one of the reasons why we end up, of course, engaging in Spanish-American War is because we're spreading our economic influence. If we have special business with Cuba, hey, we're bringing in the money. And it's so sad because it came to the point where 60% of private property of businesses, right, of the sugar plantation, that's where the money was owned by Americans after this. 60%. So while the Cuban people end up struggling financially, lack of health care, lack of education, lack of income, Americans were bringing in a lot of money. Also, bases, military bases. One of the things that we wanted to do is we wanted to become a stronger military power. So if we look at this, is allowed us to establish naval bases. We would establish a base called Guantanamo Bay, right? So this gives us more military power. So that's what the Platt Amendment does. Cuba's not given their independence. Gosh, I mean, I'm learning my seniors and we're talking about this right now in IB history. And it's not until 1950 with Fidel Castro where American influence is out. American influence is out. Anyone ever go to Cuba before? I want you to type yes or no. All right. Well, you were not allowed to go to Cuba from 1950 to about 2010, I believe, right? For that long, because they stopped diplomatic relations. I mean, you just were not allowed, all right? Well, here's the thing, Sam. I mean, one of the things that as much as, because it's important to look at things historically from overall big picture, you could say that, hey, they were communists, but you know what? Cuba actually made more progress economically and in terms of healthcare and education with the communist regime than they did underneath the fascist dictatorship and so-called republic regime with some of the leaders that America supported, right? So Mildred says, isn't that a normal thing we've seen from the U.S. when imperializing? They weren't necessarily fighting for freedom rather than a higher position for the U.S. I would completely agree. I mean, in all these cases that we're looking at, every European nation was looking to get ahead of the other, right? They would claim that there was this moral reason of what we call the white man's burden, but there was really, I mean, that was the few population that believed that, right? Yes, hardly ever does anything for the benefit of others. I mean, if it's economic, someone's going to benefit from it, and it's not usually the one that is imperialized, right? So going back to Sam's point, I mean, so you're looking at Fidel Castro, the revolutionary, and Fidel Castro, the leader. There were some generations, the older generation, which we'll talk about next class, is they praise Castro because he was able to free Cuba from Batista, who was a dictator that was supported by America. The younger and middle generation, Fidel Castro also limited a lot of individual freedoms of speech, right? So it's a mixed batch when we're looking at him, right? But we'll get to that in terms of detail. I mean, there's no such thing as necessarily, I mean, a good dictator, because it depends who you are. I mean, if you are the one that's supported by the dictator, then yes, life is going to be good for you, right? But if you are the part of the mass population that might be against, no, your civil liberties are always going to be infringed, right? So keep that in mind, right? Dictators are every dictator that you look at, every authoritarian leadership, guys, that you look at, it's only beneficial to specific groups. Always, that's it. You look at Mao Zedong in China, right? You were only benefiting if you supported his views, right? And also that if you never spoke out against his views, right? I'm getting on a tangent here, but Mao Zedong, one of the things that he did in China was he literally, he wrote to people. He said, hey, intellectuals, I want you to go ahead. It's called the 100 Flowers movement. He said, I want you just to write me letters criticizing the government. Then what he did later on was he took those letters and then he went ahead and he found those people that were criticizing him and killed it, right? I mean, Napoleon, same thing that you're looking at. I mean, Napoleon, he was expanding all throughout Europe. And he was instilling these laws amongst people that sometimes was against their free will, right? Yeah, I mean, if you could be brave and you could fight on the front lines of people, but you know what? So did Hitler, right? Hitler fought on the front lines with his people in World War I. So, I mean, dictators are only beneficial to those that fall within that same group of the dictator, right? So keep that in mind. So that's what you want to, I think we got on a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's important to acknowledge these things. So I want you to go back to this PowerPoint. We do. So Isabel says, yes, but he was going to so many wars that he became power hungry, which scares people. Yeah, I mean, Napoleon definitely did. I mean, a lot of these dictators do. So I want you to take a look at this. One of the other things that you could write about for cause and effects was, I would write down in your notes that once we defeat Spain, we also obtain Puerto Rico. Right? So, and you could bring this up as extra credit as effects of imperialism. So what I want you to do is write down insular cases, right? What it is, I'll explain what it is. Also, are Puerto Ricans Americans? And why was 1917 such an important year, right? So I'm gonna play this video.
Puerto Rico has been hit with one of the year's strongest hurricanes, but despite this, we haven't heard nearly enough about it as we did when Hurricanes Harvey and Irma made landfall in Texas and Florida, respectively. But why should American media pay attention to Puerto Rico's problems? Don't we have enough problems here in the States? I mean, it's not like Puerto Ricans are American citizens, right? Well, actually, they are, and they have been for the last 100 years. But for some reason that completely baffles me, most people don't know that people born in Puerto Rico are naturally born American citizens, eligible for the same social services and rights as if they had been born in any of the 50 states you know and love, except for the fact that Puerto Rico is not really a state at all. Which begs the question, why are Puerto Ricans American citizens? Well, the short answer is war. You see, like much of Latin America and the Caribbean, the island of Puerto Rico was a Spanish colony for over 400 years, a relationship which abruptly ended when America decided it wanted military bases in the Caribbean and the Pacific and kicked the Spanish out of Puerto Rico, Cuba, Guam, and the Philippines in 1898. Well, it's called the Spanish-American War, but we don't have time to get into all of that right now, so Google it.
Fast forward to 1917, when Congress voted to grant citizenship to every person born in the island. However, voting not to recognize the island as a proper state of America, but rather as an unincorporated territory, which, as Puerto Ricans would soon find out, meant that while they are expected to pay the same taxes and obey the same laws as their fellow countrymen on the mainland, they don't get to vote in presidential elections, don't get real representation in Congress, and unlike Detroit, their local government can't file for bankruptcy in times of economic turmoil. Which really sucks right now because the island owes over $123 billion to its creditors, a debt that the local government has no way of realistically paying, and has responded by cutting as many services as it can to its people. That's 3.4 million fellow American citizens struggling on an island where the current unemployment rate is at 12%, half of its residents are on Medicaid, and a staggering 46% live below the poverty line. Naturally, this has caused an exodus of the island's workforce. The Pew Research Center reports that more than 400,000 Puerto Ricans have migrated towards the mainland to look for the jobs and stability that simply can't be found in their native island. And if all that weren't bad enough, on September 20th, 2017, the island was hit by one of the strongest storms to ever hit the U.S., Hurricane Maria. A hurricane that, despite destroying the island's power grid and forcing tens of thousands to evacuate their towns, has not gotten anywhere near the media attention that Hurricanes Irma or Harvey got. Media attention that inspired thousands of people to aid the cities and towns affected by these storms.
Good luck, everybody.
Which is an appropriate response on behalf of American citizens when they saw their fellow countrymen in trouble, a response that unfortunately hasn't been replicated towards helping the American citizens living in Puerto Rico. Which kind of makes me want to reframe the whole point of this video. The question shouldn't be, why aren't Puerto Ricans American citizens, but rather, why aren't American citizens taking better care of Puerto Rico?
All right, so I want you to take some time. Don't worry about the insular cases. I'm going to tell you what that is. But why was 1917 such an important year for Puerto Ricans? And also, based on the video, are Puerto Ricans Americans? So go ahead, type it in the chat box. We'll continue with some music. Give you about a minute and a half. Yes, excellent. Very good. So I'm seeing a lot of comments here, right? Which is, yeah. So a couple things that, Alika, so your response is very detailed. Can I have you kind of just share what you said?
Okay.
Ricans, they do pay taxes, right? They are considered part of America, right? The Constitution does apply to Puerto Ricans. However, the right to vote and elect the president, those things are not allowed. So the answer is yes and no, right? Jennifer says Puerto Ricans were supposed to be considered as Americans, but they don't have the rights to vote for presidential elections, so they aren't necessarily, I guess you could say, yeah. But basically, once again, you're seeing that there is this economic component of it as well, right? So being part of an American territory, yes, Puerto Ricans, I mean, they do feed into the American economic system, right? One of the things that they can't do, though, is they can't declare bankruptcy like certain cities in America can, such as Detroit. They cannot vote for their leaders. They can't, right? Um, However, because they are American territory, one of the things that we're looking at is when you're getting the hurricane that hit is there should also be American support that's being provided to them, right? So in short, why was 1917 such an important year? Because Puerto Rico becomes recognized as a American territory. So you get a lot of Puerto Ricans that end up migrating to the United States for job opportunities. So insular cases, what the insular cases states, it states territories such as the Philippines and also Puerto Rico. It states that they are American territory and that these states do not necessarily have the stability and infrastructure to govern themselves. So I'll repeat that. Insular cases, it states territories acquired in the Spanish-American War, Philippines and Puerto Rico do not have the infrastructure to govern themselves. Therefore, the United States need to intervene, right? And then eventually they're going to say, hey, we'll give them their freedom, but it just takes a long time to do so. Does that make sense? So I'm going to just sum it up. In short, causes, I've talked about those causes. Effects, yeah, U.S. interventionism that happens in Philippines and Puerto Rico, okay? I have one more video that I'm going to go over that you could bring up, and I think this is very helpful, is actually we have two. I'm going to have you watch this video on your own because I know some of you guys, if you studied the white man's burden before, I want you to type yes or no. Yes or no. Go for it. Okay. So we have some time. So like I said, I'll go till about 11:20, 25. So I'm going to play just about a minute and a half of Rudyard Kipling's The White Man's Burden. This is a British poem, but it's written to the Americans, right? It's saying, what's a burden? What do I mean by a burden? Because you could use this as evidence as a cause. But I'll use it in context. If I'm like, oh, I got to go to Mr. Burba's Zoom session. It's such a burden. What do I mean by that? It's a trouble. Okay, we'll elaborate. A weight you have to carry. It's something you have to do, but you don't want to do. It's an obligation. So what this poem is saying is this is the white man's obligation. It's their inconvenience. And by white man, they're talking about Europeans and as well as America. I want you to listen to this and just write down in the chat box what you think the message is.
Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need. To wait in heavy harness on fluttered folk and wild, your new caught sullen peoples, half devil and half child. Oh, take up the white man's burden, in patience to abide, to veil the threat of terror and check the show of pride. By open speech and simple, 100 times made plain, to seek another's profit and work another's gain. Take up the white man's burden, the savage war of peace. Fill full the mouth of famine and bid the sickness cease. And when your goal is nearest, the end for others sought, watch sloth and heathen folly bring all your hope to naught. Take up the white man's burden, no tawdry rule of kings, but toil of serf and sweeper, the tale of common things. The ports ye shall not enter, the roads ye shall not tread. Go make them with your living, and mark them with your dead. Take up the white man's burden.
I'm going to stop it right there. I'm going to play this. I'm going to put the stanza right here because I think this is the most powerful one. So just type in the chat box what you think the message of this is. Look at that first stanza that I got there. Is that even the right literary term, stanza? I think it is. We'll go for it. Here's some more music. This last one was Puerto Rico. This one is the Philippines. I want you to look at that last two sentences. You caught sullen peoples, half devil and half child. What does that mean? Very good. So seeing a lot of responses here, and I think you guys are accurate, right? You're getting some very racist attitudes here. What some of you guys are saying here is, I'm just going to reiterate. So the white man's burden is saying that the U.S. should extend its helping hand to help other territories that they conquer. The white man's burden is telling them to drop their irresponsible action and start taking on by helping territories, right? This is what this is saying. I think you're right. They're saying here, take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed. What they're saying here is send the best Americans over, right, to these foreign nations. Go bind your sons to exile to serve your captives' need. Is, hey, you're our best. They might not come back, right? They're going to serve those. They're going to civilize those that they're taking over. To wait in heavy harness, unfluttered to folk and child, your new caught sullen peoples, half devil and half child. Exactly what Reina said here. It's a way of dehumanizing other people from the conquered land in which they're calling savages. So in this case, they're talking about the Philippines. What they're saying is, we're going to go over to take over the Filipinos because they're half devil and half child, that they can't take care of themselves. And we're going to show them the American way. Alexa says, like what Elka said, it's saying that they need to take more responsibility for the countries they colonize. And by responsibility, we're looking at this negative responsibility. It's looking down on the people that they're taking over, right? Mildred says Americans must stop their childish days. And I think one thing that we could look at is this doesn't stop here. I mean, this goes on in other areas as we progress through U.S. history as well, right? Questions at all about that? So last but not least, I want you to watch this video and you could mention this as causes and effects. Now we're focusing on the Philippines, right? One of the effects that you could bring up is the Philippine-American War, right? That the effects of imperialism is the Philippine-American War. And it shows that Filipinos don't want to be imperialized, right? So use this video to help you out. But also, on the lighter side is, if you know a Filipino nurse, I want you to type yes. Does anybody know of any Filipino nurse? Yes. My mom's a nurse. A lot of Filipinos are nurses, and this explains why as well, right? It is a stereotype, but at the same time, you're also looking at it as statistically speaking, there's a reason for why that is, right? And it's
immigrants, we get the job done. Or so the song goes. So we all know that when it comes to labor, the United States loves immigrants. And one of the most unique stories of American immigration and labor actually comes from the Philippines. In particular, it's the story of Filipino women who became nurses throughout the country's hospitals. Hey guys, I'm Sana. This is AJ Plus, and this Sunday I want to talk a bit about why there are so many Filipino nurses in the United States and what that says about the history of Filipino Americans and Filipino labor. Okay, So you might be saying, Sana, the US has a lot of Filipino nurses? Yep. Here's what's up. Back in 2015, foreign-born Filipinos made up the fourth largest group of immigrants in the country. And the majority of Filipinos are in California, where they make up 20% of the nursing force, which is impressive when you consider that they only make up about 4% of the state's population. Now, it's easy to think of the Philippines as all the way over there. Right over here. But Dr. Catherine Sneeza Choi, who wrote the book Empire of Care, says that imagining Filipinos as simply foreigners actually erases a history between the countries.
Filipinos, and specifically certain groups of Filipino immigrant workers, like immigrant nurses, are not foreigners in the way we tend to think about foreigners. They actually have historical interaction with Americans.
And that interaction begins like so many other immigrant interactions, with colonization. The Spanish colonized and ruled the archipelago we now call the Republic of the Philippines for a few centuries. In 1898, the Americans and the Spanish went to war, and it ended with the signing of the Treaty of Paris. As a result, the Americans got a lot of territories from the Spanish, one of which was the Philippines. But the people of the islands didn't welcome the Americans. They wanted their independence, not more colonizers. That resistance led to the 3-year-long Philippines-American War from 1899 to 1902, and it was fought between U.S. forces and Filipino nationalists. And it was a brutal war for Filipinos. It killed 20,000 combatants and 200,000 civilians as a result of the violence, diseases like cholera and malaria, and even famine. When the war ended, the Philippines came under the colonial control of the United States, and that's when the story of the Filipino nurses begins. Like many other colonies, the United States began the Americanization of the islands after setting up a government in the Philippines.
You also had American colonial officials going to the Philippines and exposing Filipinos to American culture, to the English language, to Americanized education. And this kind of training influenced so many different groups of Filipinos to dream about the U.S. and to desire to migrate there.
American health workers in the Philippines needed locals to deal with the health issues of Filipinos because malaria and cholera had killed so many during the war. But they didn't find any nurses trained the way the Americans had been trained. And so they began recruiting Filipino women to work as what were called volunteer auxiliary and contract nurses. Around the same time in 1903, President William Taft passed a law that allowed and funded certain Filipino students to study in American colleges. And this led to the first wave of Filipino nurses coming to the United States, and it also led to a lot of the nurses staying. They even established their presence with organizations like the Philippine Nurses Association of New York, and the waves of Filipino nurse migration continued throughout the 20th century, especially as the United States opened up its borders a bit more. During World War II, more Filipino nurses were trained to serve in the U.S. military, and during the same time, the Philippines came under Japanese occupation. After the war ended, the United States granted the territory independence in 1946, and 2 years later, the State Department introduced the Exchange Visitor Program, a little something created to push back against Soviet influence. You know, bring more people into the United States and show them what the capitalist good life is actually all about. Because of the decades-long colonial relationship and education in English language, the Philippines became a model country for the program, and the nurses led the way. The program was so successful that it actually encouraged more Filipinos to go into nursing. The number of nurses in the Philippines jumped over 700%, from 7,000 in 1948 to over 57,000 in 1953. The program also encouraged the building of more nursing schools in the Philippines. Back in 1940, there were only 10, and today, 429. That program, in addition to the 1965 Immigration Act, opened up the borders even more for educated Filipinos. And so by 1973, we end up seeing over 12,000 Filipino nurses immigrate to the United States. But I gotta mention this, it wasn't just because of American immigration policies that so many Filipinos were migrating to the US. In the 1970s, with President Ferdinand Marcos, who ruled under martial law, a policy of labor export was introduced. The whole idea behind the export of labor was that Filipinos would travel abroad on work contracts, make money, send it back home, and thus help a struggling economy. The government even created an agency that directly provided migrant labor to foreign governments and companies. That policy pretty much made the Philippines one of the top exporters of labor. I mean, check this. About 10% of all Filipinos are foreign workers. That's around 10 million people in around 170 different countries. And did the policy of exporting labor actually work for the economy? Well, for decades, the Philippines has been one of the top 5 recipients of money transfers from migrant labor. Shout out to Western Union. Not sponsored. Take, for instance, how in 2015, over 3 million Filipinos left the country to work abroad. They sent back $28.5 billion.
All right. So I'm going to stop it right here for the sake of time. So first off, I want someone just to unmute their mic and participate. Actually, I'm going to let you type it in the chat box and then I'll call on someone. But what was the direct effect of imperialism in the Philippines? So direct effect. So I'll give you some time to type that down. So automatically, once Spain wins or loses the war, Philippines becomes American territory. What happens immediately? Because you could bring this up in your essay as a cause or even an effect. So what happens immediately? Give you some time to type it. Get my views of the plan. Think about who Emilio Aguinaldo was. I believe it was in the chapter 44 reading. Think about the Treaty of Paris. Those are things that are very important. Yeah. So Isabel says, colonization brought American culture to the Philippines that made people want to go there. Many of them were women who were branching out of their medical practices from what they already knew. Yeah. So you can see that as a cause and effect, right? One of the causes is American expansionism, as well as spreading American education. And this would eventually lead to just better medical practices in the Philippines. Spread of immigrants over to the U.S. for labor. Yeah. But how did the Philippines respond to Americans coming over? Americans take control of the Philippines after the Treaty of Paris. They brought their culture and education, etc. Yeah, so they bring this in. But what did Emilio Aguinaldo do? They briefly mentioned his name. How did the Filipinos respond to the Treaty of Paris? Yes, Samuel, excellent, very good. So what we see here is the direct effect was that the Philippines rebelled against America when they lost. They tried to Americanize the Filipinos and open up nursing schools. Yeah. Itzel says the Filipinos saw how we were more advanced, which made the people in the U.S. want to study nursing. Yeah, so there were some good and bad, right? I mean, the negatives is we didn't want this. The Filipinos didn't want this to happen, right? So what they literally did was they engaged in a 3-year Filipino-American War. Excellent. So Filipino and American War. So I would say the causes, once again, we brought the white man's burden, Americanization, and then the effects would be the Philippine-American War, when you're getting hundreds of thousands of Filipinos that are rebelling and wanting their independence, right? But they lose this war. Okay, it would not be until 1946, I believe, when the Philippines would be given their complete independence. Does that make sense? So those are all things that you could bring up. So for your essay prompt, it's analyze the causes of American imperialism. All right, and once again, if you bring up the effects, that works. I'm looking at, give me four paragraphs, 4 paragraphs minimum, right? Double spaced. If you did not turn it in on Schoology, your last essay, if you emailed it to me, do me a huge favor, go back and just turn it in on Schoology so I make sure I get it. Questions at all about this? Any questions? If there are no questions, just type no. Okay. Very good. So, Emilio Aguinaldo, who he was, so he actually fought with the United States in the Spanish-American War. And then what he would do afterwards is he would want independence. So he would lead the troops, the Philippine troops, against the Americans in the Philippine-American War. Right, so that's the significance that he has. Okay. Anything else? And you could use this political cartoon as well as evidence of why we would engage in imperialism. You're seeing all of the territories that Spain had, right? And America's purpose, our purpose, is to stabilize and to, of course, teach them the American way where they become more successful, right? That's the white man's burden. Does that happen? Yes and no. Why did the Philippines rebel? They rebelled because they wanted their own independence. They didn't want American influence. I mean, they had been ruled by the Spanish for 200 plus years. They wanted finally the opportunity to be able to govern themselves without foreign intervention. And that just wouldn't happen until the 1940s in after World War II, right? So they didn't want American influence. They wanted freedom. Well, you would include in your contextualization, what I would bring up is, you could bring up big business, right? I would bring up how, as a result of, think about industrialization and big business, is because America was getting more wealthy, right? They needed raw materials. And where are you going to get these raw materials? You're going to go ahead and, of course, get them in these foreign nations. If you wanted to bring up the Spanish-American War, bring up what's going on in Cuba as contextualization. Those are all things that are very helpful, right? Actually, do try to get in by Sunday. I'd say by absolute latest, try to get in by I'd say by Monday, Tuesday. Tuesday, absolute latest, right? Your last essays, so what I'm going to do for your last essays, if you score below a C, if you score below a, I'll even say below a B. I'll do below B, right? If I get too many below a B, then I'm not going to give you guys feedback through video. But if I get those that are below a B, I'm going to give you guys video feedback on it, and I want you to look at the feedback. You can revise it and return it in, all right? Other questions? All right, if there's no other questions, do me a huge favor, just write down essays. Yeah, I told you when the essays do. Just write down here one last time for attendance. So just type here. And then you guys have a good week. Be safe. Shoot me an email. Let me know if you have any questions. Make sure that you upload everything on Schoology. So if you did not upload your previous assignments on Schoology, please make sure that you do. Okay? Thank you, guys. All right, have a good one. Be safe. Try to find something fun to do. My office hours, email me. Email me numerous times if you have a question, because sometimes I might not get it. Yes, you can. Let me go grab him. This is Rudd. There he is. Oh my gosh. Riley, come over here. Oh, here he is. All right. There he is. Right. All right, well, you guys are free to go. Have a good one. Say bye, Rudd. Okay, he hates me for this. He really does. Let's see. Okay. He says bye. He's staring at me. He's camera shy.